See you again, buddy.
I'm good. I'm good. We were talking about you at school today. I just had my students meet Wallace last Sunday afternoon. We had a really good talk.
Yeah, that was fun. Want to do that again if we can.
Oh, we will be. I don't know if Wallace mentioned it, but he's going to Pearl Harbor in a few weeks for the 80th anniversary. So we're going to speak with him after that, hopefully.
Wow.
My daughter's going to be there. Ellie's going to be there, Pearl Harbor.
Well, I'll try my best to find her if she.
Oh, well,
for me, just
she's going with she's growing with a group of veterans locally here, including some World War II veterans here in Pittsburgh. And yeah, no, we'll definitely try to.
Yeah, tell her to try and find Test Pilot Wallace Johnson. She'll find me.
You should be easy to find.
Yeah,
you should be easy to find.
Wallace, were you on? Was it Jamestown in Pearl Harbor on December 7th?
Oh no. She was put into commission in
42. Okay.
Last part of 41.
All right, we are starting the program. I'm starting the big band music, and we're going to let everybody in.
Not hearing anything, Todd.
You're not hearing anything. Oh, you know what? Without Ellie, the whole thing just goes.
Now I am.
Here we go. Okay. There we go. We'll let it go for a while. Until we can That's enough of that. See, everything just goes haywire when we don't have Ellie around to, look over the production of it, and when I don't give Sean permission or to be the co-host, you leave me in charge and things go haywire. Welcome everybody. This is our Veterans Breakfast Club, Greatest Generation Live. I'm Todd. I'm the director of the Veterans Breakfast Club. I just got off the road where I picked up my younger daughter from college, and came back and rushed right up to headquarters. This is Veterans Breakfast Club headquarters. It's my attic. There's enough room for me to stretch my arms out. I can touch the ceiling with my hands, and it's just perfect perfect place to spend the night talking with veterans and talking about military history, which we're going to be tonight. This is one of the programs that we do at the Veterans Breakfast Club, Greatest Generation Live, where we share stories from World War II. We also have our Veterans Breakfast Club happy hour on Monday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern. And in addition, we do other occasional programs, including in-person breakfasts. So we just had one on Saturday, about 80 people here in Western Pennsylvania. And we will have another one coming up on Saturday, December 4th, also near Pittsburgh. So if you live around in the Pittsburgh area, we'd love to have you join us. If not, we love it when you join us online. I'm here with Sean Hall, our director of programming. Hi, Sean.
Hi, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. And Glenn Flickinger, who serves two duties. He is a board member of the Veterans Breakfast Club and a wonderful advisor and counselor to me, because as you can see, he's way older than I am. Way older. So he has a lot of experience, and he's able to give me a lot of good advice. And he is also the guest, or he's also the host, I should say, of Greatest Generation Live. And he does such a wonderful job. He's my Connor Ritchie just said he's your boss. Yes, that's true. And I guess it's a good practice not to insult your boss. So I'll stop talking, Glenn. Thank you very much for hosting tonight.
Okay, my breath is taken away by that introduction. I'm in a branch of the Veterans Breakfast Club, about 2 miles away from World Headquarters, where Todd is. And Sean is in another branch. I'm not quite sure, not too far away either. So we spread ourselves. Say again, Sean?
I'm in a bunker here.
You're in a bunker. Todd's in an attic. You're in a bunker, and I'm in my office just off of the family room and garage. So we do things big time at Veterans Breakfast Club. We don't waste any money. Yeah. Well, listen, tonight we have a delightful program that we've been lining up for some time, and it just became more delightful because through our good friend Scott Masters up in Canada, who put on such a great program for us a couple of weeks ago on the Canadian role in World War II with, I think, 4 Canadian vets. But through our good friend Scott Master, he identified a USS Hornet veteran, Wallace Johnson. And, I got to talk to Wallace for about 5 or 10 minutes there. So say hello, Wallace, please.
Hi there, guys. It's a pleasure.
Wallace is a World War II veteran. Served on the USS Jamestown from 1942 to 45, which was a, see if I get this right, Wallace, a torpedo boat tender. Did I get that right?
That's correct. Yep. PT 109 thing.
That's right. What were you? So you served as PT 109. So you probably filled up future President Kennedy's gas tank several times in the Solomon Islands.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. I was on the ship as a crew on the ship, of course. I wasn't on the PT boat, but we were the tender for the squadrons.
Interesting. Okay. And Wallace lied about his age and joined the Navy in 1941 at age 16. Do I have that right?
That's correct. Right before the war.
You must have been a pretty tall, handsome-looking guy for them Navy to let you in.
Actually, I had a rough time getting in. Todd Scott will tell you about that if he wants to. Yeah, I had to lie, really lie. I call it my banana caper. Scott will tell you about it.
Okay.
I think it'd be better if you told it, Wallace, but he was a little bit underweight, and for some reason to gain the extra weight, he decided to eat 2 pounds of bananas.
I've heard that story so many times from different veterans. Larry Kirby ate bananas for days on end.
Yeah, even today, I love bananas, but got me in the Navy, believe me.
Hey, a couple of things. I'm sorry to bust in here, but I want to say Joe Gribble is on. Joe, nice to meet you. Thank you for joining us. He put in the chat, his wife's father served on the USS Hornet, Willie Preston, radio operator. Wonder if Wallace or anybody might have known him.
Can't say I did.
I hear those ships I hear the USS Hornet was kind of a big, not quite a boat, right? Something bigger than a boat.
Oh yeah, I think we had close to 3,000.
Yeah, I'm dumb, but I'm not that dumb. I know those things are really big. And the other thing I wanted to do, and then I will mute myself, I do promise, is I wanted to say hi to Joe Tedeschi. I see Joe here. Joe is a retired Army officer, and he's also the West Point graduate. And he's the author of this book, a new book just out, A Rock in the Clouds. It has to do with his Vietnam service, and specifically with an incident where he was aboard a Caribou airplane that crashed into a side of a mountain. And if you see, he survived. So he's going to come and share his story at some point, his story of service. Thank you very much, Joe, for joining us. Can I just ask you, where are you from? Where are you joining us from? Here, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
You're not talking to me, are you?
No, I'm talking to Joe Tedeschi.
Right.
Joe, we can't hear you. I think you're muted.
There
you are.
How's that?
Good.
Yeah. I'm from Medford, New Jersey. That's where I ended up, a little town in southern New Jersey.
Medford, New Jersey. Well, thank you for joining us from Medford. And I look forward to scheduling an evening where we could really talk about your book and have you share your story. Thank you, Joe. All right, back to you, Glenn. I'm sorry about that.
No, fine. Well, Wallace, I'm going to ask if you would just hold on here for a while. Wallace actually served on the USS Hornet post-World War II in 1957, I believe he told me. Okay. We're going to introduce Chuck Myers from the USS Hornet Museum. He's a docent and just found out he's on the board of trustees of the museum as well. And Chuck is our guest tonight is the USS Hornet, I suppose, right? At least CV-12. But Chuck has put a lot of time and effort into a presentation that we're going to turn the program over to him in a minute or two here and ask him to go through. We'll pause in places for questions and some dialogue. We'll focus probably 2/3 of the presentation on the USS Hornet during World War II. And then we'll also cover the post-World War II Hornet story. And that's when we'll bring you back in, Wallace, if we could. Your story, your World War II service and your military service in total, Wallace, could take up a whole program, and maybe we'll think about that another time.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. So Chuck, could I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, we can do that either by the slide that does that, or I can just tell you who I am and what I do. So as you can see from the screen, my name is Chuck Myers. I'm a docent on the USS Hornet. It is a museum in Alameda, California. So I'm not very far from where Wallace is at this point in time. The Hornet was actually home ported in Alameda and actually is at Pier 3, where it was frequently tied up when it was an active ship. So my presentation is a PowerPoint presentation, and just a little bit of housekeeping for you. This is the second time we've tried to do a program like this on Zoom using the presentation slides that you will see. So there may be some glitches that you'll have to put up with. Sometimes the audio doesn't work when we do this on Zoom. Our test worked on our test, and we'll hope it continues to work. And we also have a little bit of a we're in a little bit of a quandary as to who ought to control the slides because of the way the slides are put together. So we're going to start out with Todd controlling the slides, and if that doesn't work, we'll switch to do something else.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay, so that's what we decided. I obviously was not paying attention. So let me get
we just decided that, Todd, just a minute ago.
Oh, okay.
as I was speaking.
Okay, I was not part of that decision. Okay, I'll get it right.
So this is a presentation that we've modified for the Veterans Breakfast Club. It is usually a presentation that we give to the likes of the Rotarians and Lions Clubs and Daughters of the American Revolution and so on and so forth. So we've done it once before on Zoom. It was okay, but it wasn't perfect. So cut us a little slack on this one, and we'll get through it and talk about the museum and talk about some of the things the Hornet went through in its time frame. So this is just our starting slide to note that the Hornet, as a museum, is a Smithsonian affiliate that has advantages and disadvantages. I won't go into either one of those, but Todd, why don't you advance it, and well, we now know that we aren't going to hear the audio, so where I need to, I will superimpose the audio myself on it, and we'll see. It just anchors away, and you all know what that sounds like. This is just a mission statement. You see the Hornet where it's sitting at Pier 3 in Alameda. Typically ships, active or semi-active ships on either side of it, but it's all by itself at Pier 3 where it was berthed when it was an active ship back in the day. So let's advance one more, Todd, and this is me. I've been a docent for almost 12 years now. I served as a naval officer for 5 years, and for 1961 to 1963, I was on the USS Yorktown, which is, for all intents and purposes, almost an exact duplicate of the Hornet. One more. So just to say thank you for what you're doing, and hope you add the Hornet to your list of bucket things that you want to see. So these are the things we're going to talk about. The Hornet in U.S. history, because it's been around for a long time. Some of the things that the Hornet did, major events that the carriers called Hornet took place in, and you can see them on the screen: Doolittle, Midway, Guadalcanal, and so on, and ending up with the Apollo program. Some of the features of the museum, and perhaps how the Hornet might relate to you and yours. So let's go ahead, Todd. We have music. So click once, Todd, if you will. That'll get rid of, you saw that, if you can go back one slide, Todd, you see that the first USS Hornet was actually a ship that was commissioned in 1775 by the Continental Congress. They bought two sloops and they named them the Hornet and the Wasp. And I think the Continental Congress had sort of a wry sense of humor. They sent two stinging insects out to fight the Royal Navy, which seems like, kind of a rough task. So the Hornet name goes back to 1775, and we've had a series of them since then. So we had another Hornet that served during the Barbary Pirates War in the early 1800s. So advance it, Todd, if you will, and you can see perhaps what that might have looked like. It's speculation, I have to admit, but it's that war that we get the line in the Marine's hymn, "To the Shores of Tripoli." There were two Hornets in the War of 1812. Actually, there were two Hornets at the same time for reasons I can't explain to you. So Todd, if you advance it a couple, you'll see what those look like. There's the first, 1805, and the second in 1814, but also in the War of 1812. Then we had a ship that was in the Civil War named Hornet. We had one in the Spanish-American War. And then if you advance a few years, you will find the first of the aircraft carriers, 166 years after the first one. This is CV8, the carrier that was commissioned just a couple of months before Pearl Harbor. You can see some of the dimensions. Don't concentrate on those because we'll talk quite a bit about the difference between the aircraft carriers. You see it was involved in the Doolittle Raid, the Battle of Midway, famous for Torpedo 8, and was one of the three carriers that stopped the Japanese advance at the Battle of Midway in June of 1942. So let's advance one more. So you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen, the Doolittle Raid. I know you've talked about that in a previous discussion, so we won't spend a lot of time on it. So you can see the B-25 bomber on the flight deck of the Hornet. You'll see several of those as Todd goes through this. There you can see the destroyer Gwynn and the cruiser Nashville behind the flight deck of the Hornet. More flight deck pictures. There's Jimmy Doolittle taking off from the Hornet into basically a 40-knot gale. So he had about 60 knots of wind coming at him down the deck. So not surprisingly, he was able to get off in a relatively short run. This is the mission. You've all heard about that. They actually had to take off about 300 miles short of where they had intended to, and so didn't finish the mission by landing at airfields in China. Instead, they, for the most part, crash landed on the Chinese coast. Here you see the Hornet during the Battle of Midway. You see some of the Wildcats on the flight deck at this point in time. So just advance through that, if you would, Todd. Clearing the flight deck. Some of the things that were going on, you can see the Japanese fleet trying to avoid the bombers coming at them. A couple of more of those here. You see the Soryu doing a very nice complete circle to no avail eventually. And if you advance it, another one, you'll see the only survivor of Torpedo 8, which was the squadron that took off of the Hornet and was the first one to find the Japanese fleet. The only survivor of that squadron was the guy on the right here, George Gay. And you can see Admiral Nimitz visiting him in the hospital at Pearl Harbor when he got back.
And I might just interrupt, Chuck. If you relate this to some of the movies that have been made about the Battle of Midway, there's some great scenes of depicted of George Gay in the ocean rooting on his fellow pilots as they're bombing the Japanese aircraft carriers, right? So this is that same man, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, the speculation nowadays is that you know, a lot of that was made up by George Gay afterwards, because it would be very difficult for him to have been in a position to have seen the attack on the carriers, but it makes a great story. And as a matter of fact, I was the advisor on the latest movie, Midway, that came out in 2019. And so we carried on that tradition by having George Gay floating and cheering on the dive bombers as they attacked the Japanese fleet. Probably not completely true, but it makes a good story. And I wanted to add that one thing. This is, click one more time if you would, Todd. This is Tess Gay, who in this picture had just turned 100 and only died recently in September of last year at the age of 101. But George unfortunately didn't make it that long, but his wife was around for 101 years and a little more. So this is one of our favorite crewmen on the Hornet. Rich Nowatzki was on CV8, and this is about 3 minutes of Rich talking about his experience with Doolittle, etc. So I'll pause and just let you listen to this as he talks.
Well, here we are steaming on this 16-day trip before we launched Doolittle. And a friend, in between standing, watching on the bridge or general quarters of the gun, I'd wander around the flight deck and look at these curiosities, these bombers, you know. So I was with a friend of mine, Charlie Pellinot. He was a young seaman. I was senior to Charlie. We were in the same division. And we're walking along, and I looked at the rear of a B-25. I said, Charlie, they got wooden guns, just like the Army did in the maneuvers, you know. So we looked at, my God, they were like broomsticks. So I got a hold of the pilot. I said, are you guys going to war with wooden guns? And he said, no. We took those turrets out to reduce weight because we got to put extra gas on them. And besides, we put a camera back there so we could all photograph what were the mission, you know? So now this is 70 years ago. You don't have technology, remotes and things like you do today. And so I said, how do you operate a camera back there? And the guy looked at me and says, well, we're supposed to get some Navy volunteers. I said, really? He goes, yeah. So I said, who's picking the volunteers? He says, Colonel Doolittle. Me and Charlie go looking for Doolittle. Now, in those days, an enlisted man did not approach an officer. It was a class system, boy. You were down the bottom of the pile, you know. You could get in a lot of trouble going to stop a commander or something in the Navy and start talking. He'd have you arrested, you know. You'd be doing bread and water with the brig. And they had bread and water on it. Anyway, me and Charlie asked another Army guy, well, where's Colonel Doolittle? He says, well, he likes ice cream. Well, we had a ice cream, they call it, in the Navy, they call it ice cream a gee-dunk. We had a gee-dunk stand down near the mess hall where they had a little canteen, they sell cigarettes and stuff. So me and Charlie go down there, and sure enough, here's Doolittle sitting, eating a big dish of ice cream. And I started over there and I saw the silver oak leaves on his collar, which is the same as a Navy commander. I can't go talking to a commander. But I couldn't chicken out in front of Charlie. If Charlie wasn't there, I'd have never talked to him. But anyway, I got my nerve out. I said, Colonel Doolittle, can I speak to you, sir? And he said, why, sure. And he stands up. I'm 5'6", and he's about 5'2", like a jockey, you know. I couldn't believe how little this guy was. And so I explained to him about the thing and the guns and the camera. And I said, and Charlie and I want to volunteer if you haven't already got it. Well, he cracked up. He was laughing. He says, oh, those guys of mine having fun with you sailors. He says, the pilot operates that from the cockpit. Well, we apologized, and I told Charlie, don't you ever tell those guys a division. There were 70 men in that division. Because, you know, in the Navy, if you found a guy that wasn't too mentally swift, you'd send him down to the engine room for a bucket of steam, or the tool room for a left-handed mucky wrench, or the bosun locker for 20 feet of chow line, you know. Well, the pilot did the same thing to me and Charlie. Treated us like idiots, you know. Anyway, we realized that we made it. But anyway, later on, I thought about it. I figured that pilot actually did me a favor. Here, I got a chance to speak to a world famous man, and gave him a big laugh when he was in the middle of a pressure-filled operation, and gave me a great sea story. So, well.
So this slide sort of summarizes the contribution of the USS Hornet during the Battle of Midway. There's been a lot of speculation about the flights to nowhere. So the torpedo squadron, VT-8, was the only squadron that had even a sniff of the Japanese fleet. And of course, all 14 of those planes were shot down, with the result of only George Gay being the single survivor among the pilots that were launched from the Hornet that day. For the record, there were a number of VT-8 pilots that were already on Midway, so it didn't decimate the entire squadron, but they did lose 27 out of the 28 men they sent against the Japanese fleet that day. And the speculation is, click on it a couple of times, 3 times, if you will. Was it Stanhope Ring, who was the carrier air group commander? Was it Michener that sent them in the wrong direction? Was it Steve Jurica, the air intelligence officer at the time, who gave them the wrong information? I don't know that we will ever know the answer to that, but what we do know is that none of the aircraft, none of the fighters, or none of the dive bombers from the Hornet ever found the Japanese fleet. And fortunately, Enterprise and Yorktown were much more successful in that regard. So let's go on to the next one, if you will. The Hornet survived that and ended up being sunk at the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands in October of 1942. This shows the Hornet with some of the gunfire and some of the aircraft that were attacking her. Rich Nowatzki was also on board the Hornet during that period of time. And he talks about the fact that they were the mission really was to keep the Japanese from retaking Guadalcanal, and a lot of that was about maintaining the sea routes to Australia from the United States so that we could keep Australia in the war. In any case, the Hornet was lost on October 26, 1942. So click another one for me, Todd. This is a book that was written by Rich Nowatzki. Unfortunately, we lost him last October. Ironically, on the same day that we lost the Hornet, October 26, 1942, for the Hornet, October 26, 2020 for Rich Nowatzki. He was one of the people that was interviewed by CBS when the Paul Allen Foundation's ship found the Hornet. And one of the things that he talked about in his interview, if you go, it's worth watching. If you can find it on YouTube, and there's a URL there that you probably won't be able to use. But in any case, if you just go and find Rich Nowatzki on that, it's an interesting interview. He talked about the fact that he had left his locker when he abandoned ship, and he had left his wallet in his locker and had two $20 bills in it. He told the interviewer, and if you can find it, you can have the 2 20s. So several months later, click on it if you would, Todd. He was a speaker at one of our celebrations of the CV-8. And this is him in the CBS interview that I just mentioned to you, CBS this morning. And one more, if you will. This is Rich getting the 2 $20 bills back from the Paul Allen Foundation as he made that presentation. Weren't the same 20s, but they were the same vintage 20s as he would have had in his locker, in his wallet. So that's CV-8. And if you advance.
Chuck, maybe we pause there just for a moment.
Sure.
Because we're switching from CV-8 to CV-12 here. Are there any questions? Is there anything in the chat room, Todd or Sean, that we should address? Or does anybody have their hand up in the Zoom audience?
let's see, I'm looking at the chat here, catching up with some chat. Let's see.
I think it's obvious I'm boring the group to death there, Glenn.
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm fascinated. You know,
Hey, Todd, I have a question. That title of the book about a Navy major, that just doesn't sound right. Is there a story to that, Navy major? It's the rank structure is not such in the Navy for a major. So I know there's a twist to that. I'd like to hear the twist if possible.
I thought the same thing, Brad, but I was afraid to ask. I'm glad a Marine asked instead of me.
You know us, we're all about protocol tradition.
So we hear from Mardet. Okay. Yeah, he ended up going back into the Navy and then retired as a lieutenant commander, which is the same equivalent rank as a major. So he called himself in his book a Navy major because he was a lieutenant commander and had the gold leafs as opposed to the silver leafs that he talked about on Doolittle. So that's where that comes from.
I like that. It's because I never understand Navy ranks. So it's like he's putting it in a way I could understand.
Hey, Glenn.
yes, Wallace.
It's a small world, and I'll tell you why. I was in the task force that the Hornet was in when we made that attack on Guadalcanal. And the Jamestown was part of that task force. And we made it through. The Alchiba was a ship right in front of us. It was sunk directly in front of us. It had supplies aboard, had the Navy intelligence and the Japanese known what was in store for them in the future, they would have directed their sights on the Jamestown because we were filled with aviation gas and 110 what was it? Anyway, alcohol that ran the torpedoes that we had. We had torpedoes all over the place, and it would have blown up like a skyrocket if they had just known what the Jamestown was doing. We ended up after landing on Guadalcanal was the 7th, on August the 7th, 1942, when the General Vandergrift was in charge of the 1st Marine Division Reinforced, who ended up getting a presidential citation for that task. And normally units are called out by presidential citations. In the case of the USS Jamestown, they made a case of naming the individual crew members of the Jamestown as participants in that award. And so I have that as my #1 medal with the presidential citation. We went from Guadalcanal across the bay and ended up putting a base established there in Tulagi, which, as you know, was the British capital of the British Solomon Islands. And right. Although Guadalcanal was a tough one to keep, and remember, that was the first island that we took away from the Japanese. I consider that the turning point of the war.
Right, Wallace,
really.
For sure.
And anyway, the PT boats that we attended there, we covered the Jamestown up with foliage so that they couldn't be seen by Washing Machine Charlie that was up above us all night long looking for us, because we ended up sinking an awful lot of destroyers and cruisers in
Wallace,
the Battle of Sabo, and oh yeah, I could just go on and on.
If I can interrupt you for a moment, I'm going to ask Scott Masters and you if you could come on our December 21st Greatest Generation Live program. And I'd love to go into the details of your experience with the Jamestown during the war, especially all the naval battles there around Guadalcanal.
Could you do that, Wallace? I would love that.
Yeah, we'd love to do that.
Okay. Oh, that would be terrific. I see that Trey Berman and Scott, I will be in touch with you about that. I love the way that we just schedule Scott, like, yeah, he'll do that.
He's a nice guy. He's Canadian. Also nice.
All right. Trey Berman and Jim Wojcik, how are you guys doing? I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, Surprisingly, I don't know that much about the Hornet. And I know most of the Guadalcanal campaign, and I know there was a lot of major naval battles during the Guadalcanal campaign. We've all heard of stuff like Santa Cruz and stuff like Savo Island and Black Friday. That battle did not take place this Friday. That took place a different Friday. It's just called the same day. And finally, to the day that people say the Giants rode or the Titans clashed during the actual battleship battle of Guadalcanal. But I don't know exactly, but I think there was another. I think there was 2 carrier battles. There was the Eastern Solomons. And I was wondering if Hornet served in that, because I know Enterprise definitely served in that. Enterprise took her first blood. Her first blood spilled at Eastern Solomons. That was her first time that she got damaged. But I was wondering if Hornet was in that battle, because I feel like Yorktown wouldn't have existed because she was sunk earlier at Midway. I thought there were 2 carriers there.
Yeah, it was the 2 carriers that were principally in the Solomons and around Guadalcanal were the Enterprise and the Hornet. As a matter of fact, there's some bad blood between sailors of the Hornet and those on the Enterprise, because the Enterprise apparently got itself into a rain squall and managed to survive the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands, and the Hornet sailors thought that they had kind of chickened out. Probably not true, but that was the lore of the time. And Guadalcanal all by itself would probably take up 10 of these programs. We could talk about all of the things that went on in Guadalcanal, and in fact, if you saw the series on HBO of the Pacific, it was all about Guadalcanal and the Marines, particularly the Marines on Guadalcanal. So yes, the Hornet was involved in that and was sunk while the Enterprise was barely hit during that period of time, because they found a rain squall, or the rain squall found them.
Chuck, ironically enough, and I just thought of this when you did the introduction, that the first 2 Navy ships in 1775 were the Hornet and the Wasp, right? Yeah. And I was I never understood why they were called that. And you gave a great explanation, right? Because they were tiny little bugs compared to the British, and aptly named almost as a joke. But there was an aircraft carrier, the Wasp, also in the Pacific, that was sunk during one of the Guadalcanal battles. Do I have that right?
Well, at the same time, the Wasp had been detached from that group and was actually going to be refueled at the time of the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands. So it wasn't around at the time, but it was lost as well. And as a matter of fact, it's worth pointing out that we lost 4 carriers during World War II: Yorktown, Wasp, Hornet, and
Lexington. The Lexington, right?
Lexington, yes, yeah. And we named 4 carriers of the Essex class for those ships, and I'll talk a little bit about that later when we get to, not very much later, because we're going to talk about the CV-12 now.
Why don't we go to that now, Chuck? I interrupted you. We had some talk. Let's get back on track.
Well, I'm not sure we can get on track, but let's get back to the slides anyway. Or at least I don't know if I can get on track, but we'll give it a shot. A lot of people talk about the difference between the war capacity of the Imperial Japanese and the U.S. While all of this was going on, we were back home building 17 fleet carriers, 9 light carriers, and 122 escort carriers. Something that the Japanese could not possibly replicate. And so the inevitability of the results of the Pacific War are probably stated in that slide by itself. Interestingly enough, the statistics are that the Japanese increased their military output by 3-fold during World War II. The United States increased their military output by 20-fold from a much larger starting position. So if you want to know why it was inevitable that the Pacific War would be lost by the Japanese, those are the statistics. This is a list of the Essex class carriers that were on the way at the time. You can see most of them were actually ordered in 1940, A couple of them at the bottom were in 1941. But Yorktown was the second one built. It was supposed to be the Bonhomme Richard. Its name was changed when the Yorktown was lost at Midway. Hornet was going to be the Kearsarge, and it became the Hornet when we lost the Hornet at the Battle of Santa Cruz Islands. And Lexington was going to be the Cabot, and the Wasp was going to be the Oriskany. Now, all of those names, except for Cabot, eventually were used by Essex class carriers, but this is the list of those that actually made it during World War II at some point in time. So let's talk a little bit about the difference. CV9 through CV21 were the Essex class carriers in World War II. They were actually designed in the 30s. Most of them were ordered in 1940. And interestingly enough, they were championed by Congressman Carl Vinson. Now, I don't know whether that's why he got an aircraft carrier named after him, or if it was because he was the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. You can take your choice on that one. The Essex class carriers, at least the first ones, actually had hangar deck catapults. So you lay down a track that went out on the port side, you lay down a track that went out on the starboard side, and you launched the aircraft sideways, if you will. And that was for scouting purposes. Turned out not to be a very good idea for a whole lot of reasons. These are the guys that made up the fast carrier task forces, which were the principal fighting forces in World War II in the Pacific. And a lot of them, 11 as a matter of fact, eventually showed up in March of 1945 at Okinawa, which was a really massive amount of carrier and other naval power at that point in time. So Todd, click one if you will. This shows you what the Yorktown class carriers were. This is the Yorktown Cv5 here. You can see the displacement, the number of aircraft. It was actually launched by Eleanor Roosevelt, interestingly enough. But you can see that it had about 90 aircraft. Basically loaded was about 26,000 tons. And if you go to the next slide, you can see what the difference in the two carriers were. This is the Essex CV9, and its first captain. We'll talk a little bit about him in a second. You can see that let's go back one. Yeah, basically an Essex class is about 50 feet longer, both at the waterline and at the flight deck. The beam is considerably wider, and it actually has about an 8-foot draft differential between that and the Yorktown class carriers. Instead of 90 aircraft as its top, that's what we started with in 1943. At the end of the war, we were able to get 103 aircraft on an Essex class carrier. Both of them had 3 aircraft elevators. Both of them could potentially have 2 flight deck catapults. Some had the hangar deck catapult we talked about earlier, and some were long haul. So the design of the Essex class carrier didn't remain frozen. They actually changed it a bit as they learned more and more about it during the course of building the first 17 of those carriers. The reason I've got the first CO up there, Captain Donald Duncan. Duncan was the guy that actually wrote up the plans for the Doolittle Raid. He wrote it on pretty much on yellow legal pads, and ended up giving those papers to Miles Browning when Doolittle met Halsey and Browning in San Francisco before the Hornet left for the raid. And unfortunately, they have been lost. And so we don't actually know what the plans were for the Doolittle Raid, but this is the guy that actually did the most of the planning. So the next slide we'll talk a little bit about some of those things, and you can read through this very briefly. We don't have to talk about it, but it does show you the difference between the two carriers. The Essex class were considerably hardier than the previous class. And one way that is particularly important is right there in the middle where it says the division of engineering plant into 2 independent plants. So you have 2 engine rooms and 2 boiler rooms. Actually have 2 engine rooms and 4 boiler rooms on the Essex class carriers, and they're separated quite a bit. So the chances of completely stopping an Essex class carrier were fairly remote. Triple bottom also with a lot of side protection with tanks on both sides of the hull. So that's just some of the differences there you see. Next
What
slide,
about,
Todd.
Chuck, what about speed? Were the Essex class carriers significantly faster?
No, they were both about the same. The top speed of both of them was around 33 knots or 39 miles an hour. I frequently tell guests on the Hornet that yes, you can water ski behind an Essex class carrier at full speed, but you have to be very patient about getting up on your skis because we don't go that fast very quickly. Another interesting statistic, people will ask, well, how long would it take you to stop if you were at full speed on an Essex class carrier? And the answer is, if you just stopped the engines, you would actually end up dead in the water about 23 minutes later. This shows you a comparison of the Essex class carriers as modified, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, compared to a Nimitz class carrier. And the Ford class is pretty much the same profile as the black on this particular slide. So you can see that you can plunk an Essex class carrier down into the hull of a Nimitz class carrier and it will disappear. So there's quite a bit of difference. One statistic, Hornet with the angled deck has about 2.5 acres of flight deck space. The Nimitz class carriers have about 4.5 acres of flight deck space.
Wow. Wow.
So next slide, Todd. So let's talk a little bit about the Hornet. It was the fourth of the Essex class carriers, part of the Fast Carrier Task Force's presidential unit citation, as Wallace mentioned. So everybody that was on Hornet at that time could wear that top left-hand ribbon. It has 9 battle stars. Some of those you will recognize: Philippine Sea Lady, Gulf, Okinawa. Never really seriously damaged, set a lot of combat records. During the Cold War, it was an anti-submarine carrier. We were worried considerably about the number of submarines that the Russian fleet had, and so we devoted a lot of assets to that. Served 3 tours on Yankee Station. And the next slide will show you a little bit more of that. I said never seriously damaged in relation to the Hornet, but this is an aircraft on the flight deck that's burning up. So never seriously damaged is a relative term. But not everything was about fighting. So if you look down on the flight deck of good old number 12, you can see there's a volleyball game going on in the elevator pit below on the hangar deck in this instance. And there's an interesting photograph that we have in Hangar Bay 1 of the Hornet Museum today, and it shows a basketball game going on the hangar deck of a carrier. And one of the people that is jumping for the ball at the outset is a lieutenant by the name of Gerald R. Ford in that particular picture. He was a lieutenant on the USS Monterey at the time. So this gives you a bird's eye view. This is the scoreboard that we have in Hangar Bay 1 over the main bomb elevator. Set a lot of combat records. And we'll talk a little bit more about those, but you can see ships sunk and all of the flags of various kinds describing cruisers, destroyers, cargo ships, aircraft carriers. And down on the bottom right-hand side, you see that 668 planes were shot down by Hornet pilots, and they destroyed 742 of them on the ground. So it has a fairly robust record. Excuse me a second. Some of the combat history arrived in the Pacific Theater in March of 1944 and was never in port for the next 15 months. So it never really was tied up alongside a pier until it got back to San Francisco in June of 45. It was involved in the Philippine Sea, the Marianas, Turkish Shoot. You can see all of the battles that were involved and all of the big names that you can think of. Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and so on. Excuse me, I have to take a drink here.
Take your time, Chuck. Take your time, Chuck. One of the things Chuck and I talked about as he was putting this together was, the fast carrier task force. Interesting enough, the primary commander ended up being Mark Mitcher, who was the commander of the Hornet for the Doodle Raid. And he's a man that there's a couple biographies out there of his that I've not read, and they're on my list to be read. And he's kind of one of those names that I think is a little bit lost to us now in World War II history, and what a key role he played in charge of for 90% of those battles, the fast carrier task force.
Yeah, it's also interesting that when you talk about the Fifth Fleet and the Third Fleet, basically they were the same ships and the same crews with different admirals in charge. So Mark Mitcher was one of those, and he was Task Force 58. He was in charge of the fast carrier task forces. When he wasn't in charge, there was another vice admiral by the name of John S. McCain, who was the admiral that was in charge of Task Force 38. Happens to be Senator McCain's grandfather, and Senator McCain's father was actually the Commander-in-Chief Pacific when John McCain, the senator, before he was senator, was in the Hanoi Hilton. So there's a lot of personal history of some pretty famous names involved in that, and Mitchner is one of them, and Slew McCain is another of those.
Right.
So these are the ships that were sunk, and it participated in the sinking of the Yamato when the Japanese sent it towards Okinawa, basically to be a gun platform, which it wasn't a very good one of. So that's what combat history. Some of these are interesting statistics. 10 pilots achieved ace in the day status on the Hornet. That means they shot down 5 aircraft in one day. 27 of the 42 VF2 Hellcat pilots were aces. 62 enemy aircraft shot down in one day, 255 in 1 month, and so on and so forth. And the bottom line is it was under attack 59 times, but really was never seriously damaged.
Chuck, if I could ask a question about the air crews. I think, I'm not sure about this, Chuck, but in my reading about the fast carrier task force, the air crews were rotated through, right? That there were air crew might come on board, fly off the Hornet or any of these carriers for a month or two, be replenished occasionally with pilots because pilots were casualties. But then a different air crew would come in after a few months. But the same crew of the ship stayed the same the entire time, but just the air crews that rotated through. Do I have that correct?
Yes, you do. And one thing I can recommend to the audience is there's a documentary called 11 that documents Air Group 11 that served on the Hornet in 1945. And it's really interesting because a lot of it was filmed on the Hornet today, but a lot of the people that appeared in it were the guys that were actually in Air Group 11, most of whom are gone now. But 3 or 4 years ago, we worked with a movie producer to produce that video, and it's a documentary, and it's just titled 11, and that will give you some idea of what Glenn was just talking about. The other thing that is worth noting is that one of the things that the U.S. did that was a major contributor to the war effort was those pilots who had been in combat were rotated back to train other pilots, and so their experiences were shared with the new guys that were coming on board. The Japanese did not do that. And that was one of the reasons why they were terribly ineffective at the end of the war. That the reason the Marianas turkey shoot was as bad as it was is because they had, inexperienced pilots that had not been given any of the craft understanding that was given to the American pilots when they first came aboard a carrier. So they may not have been able to land very effectively at night, but they knew what they were up against when they were fighting the Japanese. So as you see down at the bottom, we lost 149 in the air group over time, and ship's company 14. So what's left to talk about? Well, I mean, all of the things that were involved in some of these things that we've talked about. Philippine Sea, the Marianas, Turkey Shoot, lots of things to talk about there. Lady Gulf, for example. Why did two of the admirals that were in the Japanese fleet not even talk to each other, even though they were on the same basic mission? Halsey getting a teletype from Nimitz that had padding at the end of it that says the whole world wonders, and the padding was still in the message when Halsey got it, and infuriated him. Little things like that. Taffy 3, the things they did at Lady Gulf. Why not Formosa instead of the Philippines? There's, a big argument about why did FDR side with MacArthur and decide that the Philippines were the thing to do as opposed to Formosa. Okinawa itself was a huge battle with a lot of carrier aspects to it. Actually, the Hornets air group was the first to bomb Tokyo after the Doodle Raiders did it initially in 1942. So there's some legacy there that you could talk about. Even Cameron Bay, which was famous during Vietnam, was one of the areas that the Hornet was involved in. So, Todd, if you will, any questions about any of that, I'd be happy to talk about. I said that the Hornet was not damaged by anything that was military, but it was damaged by Mother Nature. And you can see in these pictures that it went through a typhoon off of Okinawa in June of '45. And you can see on the left-hand side, the flight deck at the bow has a dog ear of about 25 feet on it. And that was the case on either side. So the ocean coming up underneath the overhang of the flight deck in those days caused enough metal fatigue that it collapsed on both sides. They actually launched 3 aircraft after that had happened. And the pilots reported there was such a strange wind vortex when they went off the bow that they suggested that not happen anymore. So in order to keep the Hornet's aircraft in the fight, they actually backed the Hornet down as fast as it would go in reverse, which is about 18 knots, launched all of the aircraft on the Hornet off the stern. They stayed in the fight and the Hornet came back to Hunters Point. If you show the next slide, Todd, you'll see a little bit more of that damage from the typhoon. On the left, you see the forecastle where the anchor chains are and that sort of thing. It's open to the sea, as you can see, and you can see some of the aircraft on the right-hand picture that were piled up on the flight deck. All of that led to certain improvements in the aircraft carrier design. Click a couple of times, Todd, and you'll see what the arrows are actually pointing out. This is the Hornet in go back one if you will. The Hornet in 1953, after it had been converted to handle jets. One of the things that had to happen in that case was they had to harden the stern of the flight deck so that you could land heavier aircraft at faster speeds. They changed the configuration of the elevators a little bit. They were originally all center line. They put one of them out on the port side, about even with the island. And if you look at the bow, you see there were gun tubs, 40 millimeter gun tubs on the bow at that point in time. So that's why you had the overhang of the flight deck at that point in time. So you can see how the waves would come up under that flight deck and cause difficulty. The next slide will show you how things got changed. You can see here the Hornet as it looks today. It has an angled deck, which one arrow will show you. It's about 11 degrees off of the axial of the bow. So click once, Todd, and you'll see that. That's the angled deck. So you can actually launch and recover aircraft at the same time if you need to. You typically don't do that. And the other thing was that the bow and the flight deck were integrated with the so-called hurricane bow. So now that particular problem of a typhoon has no particular effect on a carrier in today's world. And as I mentioned earlier, in 1959, with the angled deck, she became a CVS, and the S stands for anti-submarine warfare, and that was the main mission of the Hornet during the 60s and 70s,
Chuck,
along with the.
could I ask you to pause for just a moment, Chuck?
Yep.
At this point, maybe we should bring in Mr. Wallace Johnson again, because he served on the Hornet starting in 1957.
Right.
And Mr. Johnson, what was your position on the Hornet at that time? What was your responsibility?
You're muted.
You're muted. Wallace, you're muted. Todd, can we do anything to help him?
Here I am. Am I now good now?
Now you're
Yep.
good.
I was a chief electronics technician on the Hornet in 57.
So you were looking for Russian subs?
Yeah, that's basically it. Yeah, we had,
Where was that? In the Pacific?
oh, yeah, in the Pacific. Yeah,
Find any?
what's that?
Did you find any Russian subs?
Well, they were around. Yeah, intelligence told us they were around and still are, as I understand it. You know, it's a small world. The funny part about the Hornet with relations to me, and not only did I serve on it, but she was involved in picking up the Apollo 11, as you know, the lunar landing module. And I wrote the procedure for the astronauts to use the proper procedures in the reentry. So my document is part of NASA's reentry concepts and routine. I trained Armstrong on how to actually, I probably have more hours in the capsule of the 11 than Armstrong ended up with. Yeah,
So-
there's a
so-
picture in National Geographic with me that I'm in the center looking up at the panel, and that was Apollo 11 too, the capsule. So I spent a lot of hours in that capsule with those astronauts.
Actually, Chuck was going to finish the presentation with the Apollo 11 recovery. Since we're on this with Wallace Johnson, and he was involved in that, Todd, could you put the PowerPoint back up? And Wallace, what is this? This looks like you're on a mission to Mars.
Yeah, that was this picture was taken around 1964. But I was involved with the program for 10 years, and I trained all of the 7 Mercuries, which were Mercury astronauts, which were the original Apollo group. And I had the pleasure of working, as I said, with all of them. I was hired by North American Aviation, actually, when I came on board to fly in B-52s. I was an inertial navigation specialist at the time, and they were having cockpit-itis. Some of the bombardier navigators were having problem programming their inertial navigation system. And we had 2 ground GM-77. We had groundhog missiles, 2 of them hanging from the wings of B-52. And I did that for 18 months. Flew all over the United States, refueled out with KC-135s, the Gulf of Mexico, bombed the devil out of Chicago, Miami, destroyed Houston. Just had all kinds of fun. But we won the Apollo contract in 1962, and North American Aviation called me back to the plant, and we set up the training schedule, which lasted 10 years and working with them. I went from a transition as a civilian, as a chief petty officer. There I was a chief quartermaster because I went from signalman to chief quartermaster. Then they sent me to electronics school, and I ended up immediately going from the Hornet right after I went to the Hornet after graduating from electronics school. And I was on her for about a year in 57, and then they sent me back to the electronics school as an instructor. And I instructed at the Great Lakes Electronics School for 3 years, and then retired in 1960. That's what I got together with the Apollo. I joined North American Aviation as a test pilot.
So let's go back to the recovery of Apollo 11. Todd, in the PowerPoint, and Chuck, I'm sorry to be murdering your presentation here. My apologies.
This is interesting, yeah.
So if you go to the PowerPoint, near the end of it is, now who is this?
That's me.
And you're in the Apollo capsule?
That's right. That's it.
And when would this have been taken?
Oh, I figure I can't remember the year, but it was shortly before the actual landing. I was Apollo 11 capsule.
Okay. And in the PowerPoint, Todd, near the very end, there's a couple of shots that Chuck has of the Hornet recovering Apollo 11.
Sorry about this, Glenn, but I'm preempting that.
Oh, go ahead. You go right ahead, Todd.
And I've got to thank Scott Masters for putting these in the chat to me.
Okay.
Man, Scott, I tell you, you enhance these programs so much. Wallace, are you in this picture?
I'm in the center. That's me in the center.
I like that picture.
Oh, yeah.
And he likes that picture.
What was your role here? What were you doing?
We had just left the van that transported us to a site, and we were getting ready to go into the capsule to do some training.
Wow.
Yeah, we're all kind of speechless. You know, Wallace, kids grow up wanting to be astronauts, and you were.
Yeah, the doctor to the left, there's a doctor to the left holding my helmet, and a doctor to the right of the test pilot that's on my right, whose name was Armstrong, by the way.
Is that the Armstrong? Is that?
No, that's not. No,
It's not Neil Armstrong.
Jerry Armstrong. He was one of the test pilots with North American that worked with me closely on these studies.
So again, what hit me in your story was the Hornet recovers Apollo 11.
Right.
And what was your role relative to the recovery of Apollo 11?
I wrote the re-entry procedures for making the re-entry possible. Remember, everybody thinks that, or a lot of people think that the Apollo re-entered, with the pointed part. It
had the heat shield underneath.
It's the other way around. It's bass backwards. It's the ablative shield that's on the bottom that took up, and burnt the ablative material that was on the bottom of the. But to maneuver that son of a gun, you got to remember that when you're coming back for a reentry, you've got a target that you got to pretty well stay in and hit. Otherwise, if you're too shallow, you're going to skip right back out into space. If you hit it too sharp an angle, you're going to burn up. So what you have to do is sort of oscillate your way as you're losing altitude, slowing that booger down, so that it won't burn up. But there was a cross-coupling problem with the Apollo. It's not a symmetrical object. And when you roll with you get yaw, and if you throw in pitch, you might get yaw. So there's a cross-coupling effect on the jets that were controlling the attitude of the spacecraft as it came in. And you really had to learn how that cross-coupling effect could get you into trouble. In an airplane, if you throw pitch in, you get pitch. You roll necessarily, literally like the rest of us. Yeah, I wasn't about to miss that one.
Okay. Thank you.
In Downey, California, that's where they made it. That's where they made the Apollo.
Todd, you have anything else? Any questions?
Let's see. Any other questions? Trying to see if we have
for Mr. Johnson, right?
Yeah,
now.
for Mr. Johnson. Questions for Mr. Johnson. No, I think we're good to go.
Okay. Well, Mr. Johnson, thank you very much again. And again, we will be in touch with you through Scott Masters and see if we can't have you on our December 21st Greatest Generation Live program.
And I should remind people, and thank you, Scott, for reminding me to remind people, Wallace Johnson is 96 years old.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, to hear him talk with that authority and that recall is just amazing, Wallace. Thank you. Just
All of you are youngsters.
yeah.
On my best days, I can't match you, Wallace. On my best days, and I'm about 30 years younger. So, Chuck, again, I apologize for stepping all over your presentation.
Fascinating, fascinating.
Yeah, and Wallace can't be more than 15 minutes from where you're sitting, Chuck.
Yeah, as in
Tell
the
me
sky.
about it.
Yeah, as in
I'm
the
going
sky.
to abduct him.
On my birthday, I went flying. I went out to the Aero Club at Northfield in Oakland International, and I went up with my caregiver, who is right here in the room, who I recently married, by the way. So I'm on my honeymoon. And
You recently married.
I went flying. Went on.
Hold it. I'm gonna have to hold it. You recently got married.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
There she is.
Congratulations.
And I'm sending her to Chile in December. So I'm going to be by myself, having to be a bachelor all by myself. She's been taking care of me for 5 years. And so I'm going to send her home to Chile for 2 months.
Well,
It's
Wallace,
Chileano. In Santiago de Chile?
She's going.
Yes, Milipilla.
Yeah.
Vamos a Santiago.
Visité muy veces.
¿Sí?
Yeah.
¿Cuándo? ¿Cuánto
Oh,
te fue?
it's 5 or 6 years. 5 or 6
Oh.
anyway, no, forget that. Forget that part.
Changes.
Forget that part.
Well, I'm going. One of the things that we're looking forward to.
Changes.
I'm going to take her with me back to Cuba. I lived for 10 years in Cuba as a child. So we're going to see what we can do about taking that as a tourist thing.
Wallace, I want the film rights on your movie.
yeah, Wallace, you are already our hero, and now you really are a role model. So thank you.
I want the film
Oh,
rights.
if you guys are interested, just Google my name. I wrote a book from here to infinity with Synergy. And I don't know whether you got that. Did you get that, Scott? Scott, are you there?
Yeah, I don't know if Scott didn't tell me that. I will look that up, Wallace.
Well, I
Absolutely.
can supply
I got it
you
right
guys
here, a signed
with,
copy.
I can,
Oh, you got it right there. Signed copy there. Scott has a signed copy. Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Chuck, let's go back to the PowerPoint. Thank you, Wallace. We're going to finish up here with Chuck. Because Chuck,
I think I'd rather listen to him, but
into this.
Yeah, that's a hard act to follow, Chuck.
Yeah.
I got that right.
Chuck, why don't we go to the slide about Vietnam, Westpac and Vietnam service?
Yeah. So the Hornet was, as we talked about, was an ASW, anti-submarine warfare carrier for most of its life, but the Tonkin Gulf is not deep enough for submarines. So in her service on Yankee Station in the Gulf of Tonkin, in 3 instances, she was a search and rescue ship and used the S-2 trackers and the Sea-King helicopters for that purpose. We have an S-2 on board the Hornet now that we have just recently restored, and it's going to be dedicated to a crew that we lost, the only loss that the Hornet had during Vietnam during a search and rescue operation. So that'll be done with the families of the guys that we lost in 1966.
Wow.
So that's Vietnam service as well. So it has a fairly long life, doing various and sundry things. By the way, somebody asked about what did we do with Soviet submarines? Well, at the time that I was on the Yorktown and when Wallace was on the Hornet, we used the same kind of aircraft. And if we found a Soviet submarine, the game was to stay with them until they had to snorkel in order to breathe. And at that point in time, you'd won the contest. So that was the deal back in the day with the Russian submarine fleet.
Interesting.
So if you fast forward to 1998, the Hornet becomes a museum. It is, as I told you earlier, at the same pier as it was during its service in Alameda. It is a National Historic Landmark. It's also a California Historic Landmark. And as Todd scrolls through it, it took all that stuff that it had done and opened as a museum in October of 1998. So we just celebrated our 23rd anniversary. I'm going to give you a quick idea about what's there. We have 14 levels and decks that are open for touring. We go all the way from the fifth deck in the fire rooms, all the way up to the 08 level at primary flight control. All of that is open. You can see some of the pictures of what it looked like back in the day at the top and what it looks like today. So if you go to the next thing, it'll show you the most recent things we've done. Docent-led tours, we do lots of things with docent-led tours to the lower parts of the ship and the upper parts of the island. You can see in the picture, there's the NASA administrator along with Richard Nixon. You can see his naval aide there. You can't see Admiral McCain, who's relatively short, but he's behind the NASA administrator there at the front of the picture. On the Hornet, we do lots of tours. I'm going to do a real quick one on this. If you go through, this is what the Combat Information Center looks like. It's breaking up, unfortunately, but you can see there on the left, it's going by the so-called bogey board.
I'll try it again.
Yeah. There's the bogey board you're seeing there. You're looking at some of the radar screens. The screen just to the left there is a picture of Task Force 58.1 on March 25th, 1945, just to show you what that looked like. Air intercept is over here in the corner that we're just going through to the left. So you have both square screens for height finding radar and the regular screens. This is just Combat Information Center as it exists today, and it pretty much looks like it did in 1970 when the ship went out of service. So we've done a lot to restore the Hornet, and this is just one of those things that you can see on a docent-led tour, lit as it was in the late 1960s with blue light. Let's skip on to the next one, Todd, if you will. We also do restoration. You can see this Wildcat that we're bringing on board in this picture was underwater in Lake Michigan for the better part of 50 years. And when it was recovered, they sent it on to the Hornet to restore. The next slide is a picture, and I'm going to ask Todd to skip through it because it's about 5 minutes, but it'll give you an idea of what that ship looked like, or what that aircraft looked like, and what we were doing to it. So all of this is done by volunteers. There you can see the restoration area, aircraft restoration area of the Hornet. And when you get to the end, you'll see what these guys accomplished. Again, all volunteers doing our aircraft restoration. So when you see the Wildcat today, you will see something that looks like it just came out of the GM factory. In this case, this is an FM2 Wildcat, so it was built by General Motors. But that's what it looks like today. So everything was restored. So it looks like if we started it up, we could probably take it off into the wind coming from San Francisco as we sit in the bay.
And that was all done by volunteers.
It was done 100% by volunteers, yes.
Amazing.
Wow.
That is amazing. Yeah.
All on board the Hornet. Is that right?
Well, some of it was done, and some of the painting and some of the glass work was done in another facility, but most of the work was done on the Hornet. There you can see it in the hangar deck as it exists today.
Oh, what a beauty.
How did they even find this plane at the bottom of Lake Michigan?
Well, they lost a number of planes that off of Glencoe Naval Air Station was a training facility back during World War II, and we actually had 2 aircraft carriers that operated in the Great Lakes in the 1940s. They were actually converted ferries that they paddle wheel ferries, by the way, that they converted into aircraft carriers so they could train pilots without the danger of the Russian or the German submarines or anything else. So there were a number of planes that were lost, and over time they found quite a few of them, and we got that particular Wildcat in, I think it was 2006, and it took us about 10 years to actually do all the restoration work to get it back to where it is today. But if you look at it today, as I said, it looks like it just rolled off the assembly line at General Motors. These are things that the volunteers do. We have a restoration crew that restores the ship, and as I said earlier, we have 14 decks and levels of spaces that are restored, and they look like they did in 1970. That's our objective, so that you think when you're on the Hornet that the crew is still there in 1970. So I don't know about anybody on the call today, but we try to tell people in the Bay Area that they could be part of that crew. And let's go back to 1969, and you know, we talked with Wallace about this. There you see on elevator number 3, you see the Apollo 11 capsule. Click 1, if you will. If we had all of the audio going on, and try to click on that if you can, because you actually hear.
Yeah, it says audio not found for some reason. I don't know.
Okay, well, what you hear is, I can repeat it because I've heard it so many times. You hear Apollo 11, Apollo 11. This is Hornet, Hornet over. And the response is from Neil Armstrong giving the position of the capsule at that particular point in time. So that's July 24th, 1969. And the Hornet also, click one more if you will, Todd, also picked up Apollo 12. So the first 4 men that walked on the moon left their first solid footprints on Earth in Hangar Bay 2 on the Hornet. And we us Navy guys like to point out that Apollo 12 was an all Navy crew. So that's one of the things that we talk about. On the Hornet today, we have a mobile quarantine facility, which seems particularly appropriate in our time frame now. And you can see Nixon standing in front of that. If we had the music, you would hear ruffles and flourishes and hail to the chief. We also have all of the things that you see there. We have the mobile quarantine facility for Apollo 14. We have the AS-202 capsule that was flown in 1966 and recovered by the Hornet as well. And lots of things in the Apollo exhibit room. And of course, we point out that the USS Hornet is the largest artifact left from the Apollo program. So what we talked about, history from 1775 to today, or at least to the recent past, and the rest of the things that will come up as Todd clicks as to what we had talked about, what we did, some of the exhibits and things that we have, and hopefully something that is of interest to all ages and backgrounds. And we asked the question, how about that bucket list of yours in relation to the Hornet? So that's the end of the program. There is another slide there that would show you if we were interested. We are currently restoring an F4 Phantom in the restoration area in Hangar Bay 3. And so that's the current project for those same volunteers that did the Wildcat. And also did a TBM earlier, by the way. They also restored a TBM on the Hornet, and most recently the S2. So there you see the F4 that's currently back in Hangar Bay 3.
Yeah.
So if there are any questions about anything, I'd be delighted to ask them or answer
Jim
them.
and Trey? Yeah, Trey and Jim. I don't know if your hand is still up from before.
Oh no, I had a new question.
New question.
So I've been this is a lot to unpack because a lot of really cool information has just been I've been eating this stuff up, and I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to focus on the one that I've been really aching to ask about the Hornet Museum, because it's been on my bucket list for a while. I've made it a mission, it's my personal mission to visit every single museum ship in the United States, and that's one of the ones that I'm really excited to try to see. One of my questions was probably a subjective thing, because I've been on the Yorktown before, very similar. I go on the Yorktown all the time with my grandfather over here. And one of the not this grandpa, my other grandpa, served on one of those, and I think they're really neat. And it's just a neat, unique part of World War II. But my dad thinks the Command and Operations Center is the coolest. So, and
What's your favorite thing? Yeah. So Trey, that's a great question. Chuck, what is your favorite thing on the USS Hornet? Come on.
Well, I guess I enjoy most giving tours of the pilot house and the bridge, because I was an officer of the deck underway, and so that was my battle station, among other things. I was the OOD for general quarters, and so the bridge is still my favorite. The coolest thing, to be honest with you, though, is what I showed you in the video of Combat Information Center. People go in there, and we have all the lights on, so it's like, plain old everyday lighting, and then we turn the lights on like it was lit in that video with the blue, so that you don't destroy your night vision, and you get a chorus of wow. And so
I'm with
that's cool.
I could spend a lot of time in that room. That's really cool.
But we've restored so much of the Hornet. People go to the fire room that have served on carriers or on similar ships that had the same kind of boilers, and they're blown away by the fact that we've restored the fire room the way it is. So there's just a lot of stuff there. We think it's the best restored ship, Navy ship, U.S. Navy ship anywhere. I would argue possibly the Vasa in Stockholm might rival the Hornet in terms of coolness, but it's still, my favorite, and every day I go aboard, it's kind of like deja vu all over again, because it's, just like walking up the brow as a 23-year-old ensign, or almost a 23-year-old ensign on the Yorktown some time back, a lot longer ago than I'd like to think, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it was going back to the Chief's mess. And
the Chief's mess has been restored.
Yeah.
Tell us about the Chief's mess, Wallace.
What about it?
Yeah, is that where you ate?
Yeah. Yeah, we had our own mess, and
Best place to eat on the ship.
Yeah, food was good. Believe it or not.
The worst place to eat on the ship was in the wardroom.
In the wardroom? Why would that be?
Well, the crew, when you were the officer of the deck, just as a way to point this out, when you were the officer of the deck for the noon to 4 p.m. watch, you had to go down to the crew's mess and eat lunch to make sure the crew was being fed well. Yeah. And that was always the best meal I ever had. I always looked forward to have the noon to 4 watch, because I was going to get something that was cooked by professional cooks. The cooks for the wardroom back in the day were stewards, and the stewards were not trained in any of the Navy's cooking schools. And believe me, the Navy has things that are close to cordon bleu schools when you get right down to it. So the crew was served by those people, and the officers were served by stewards, and there was a dramatic difference in the quality of the food. Today, one meal is prepared, one set of meals is prepared for everybody, and so the officers and the crew eat the same meal. They just eat them in different places, but not so in my day.
Wow. Well, Todd, are any other questions from anybody? Have their hand up? Or
I think that's it. I think we've exhausted the questions for now. Okay. Wallace Johnson, thank you so much for joining us at the last second.
Yes.
And bringing Scott, thank you for helping us to connect to Wallace. And I do look forward to seeing you again, Wallace, in a few weeks.
My pleasure.
All right. And I will be in contact with you about that.
Okay.
Chuck Myers, what a wonderful program. I mean, to call you an expert is an understatement. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing some of your knowledge.
Well, if can I ask for payment in this fashion?
Sure.
Let me know when Wallace is on, because I'd like to be a part of that one.
You got it.
For sure. And Chuck, I personally too want to thank you very much. I know over the last 2 or 3 weeks in our discussions, how much time and effort you put into that presentation. And one thing that we just touched on, I don't know if Todd, if you caught this, it's the second time I heard Chuck talk about it or mention it, and I want to ask Chuck more about this in a separate conversation, but you were the advisor in the movie, the recent movie, The Battle of Midway. Did I hear
Yes.
that correct?
Yeah, the title of the movie is Midway. Yeah, I was asked to do that. I spent 3 weeks in Montreal on various sound stages doing that, and it was more fun than I can possibly tell you. Only at one point in time did they actually say, "No, I'm not going to do it your way." Roland Emmerich said, "Chuck, it's a movie," and I thought that ought to be the T-shirt.
Yeah.
So as a result of that, I also was asked by another movie that's not yet out. It'll be called Devotion. It'll come out sometime next year. I'm reasonably sure, and that's about the first black naval aviator, Jesse Brown, got shot down over the Chosin Reservoir in 1950, and his wingman crash landed alongside of him to try to get him out. Tom Hudner by name. And that movie is going to be coming out soon. So as a result of doing Midway, which was just completely serendipitous, they scouted the Hornet as a possible shooting site, and I just happened to give those guys a tour of the ship, and then I did it again sometime later. But as a result of working on Midway, I also got to work on Devotion. So my movie career, starting at the age of 80, was started in 2018. So whole new career for aircraft carrier.
When the movie about Wallace Johnson comes out, maybe we'll get you a job there too.
That's right.
And that can be filmed on the Hornet, because we do have an Apollo capsule that's been restored too. So AS-202 sits in Hangar Bay 2 as well.
Well, again, one more time, thank you very much for a very entertaining evening.
My pleasure. Thank you for your question.
And we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Great program, and happy Thanksgiving, everybody. A lot to be thankful for, and I'm thankful for all of you who join us so often, and we have these wonderful conversations. I'll see you after Thanksgiving on Monday night when we talk with Bob Dvorak about the 82nd Airborne since Vietnam. All right, I'll see you guys.
Stay healthy.
Take care.